everybody. So today we are going to go over postmodern poetry, specifically the poems of Corey Vance and Ewing. So a little bit of background about postmodernism. Um, Postmodernism shows up after World War II when people collectively realize, oh, maybe progress isn't guaranteed and systems don't actually care about us. So the term postmodernism first appeared in 1975, but we trace its roots back to the aftermath of World War II. More on that in a minute. While modernists try to rebuild meaning through art, postmodernists toss a blueprint and asks, well, does meaning even really exist? Um, Essentially, the World War II and the Holocaust led to a collapse in belief in progress. Basically, the idea that we no longer trust big explanations for the world. And so, in postmodern works, you're going to see a lot of collapse in meaning as well as a blending of high and low culture. So let's talk about a breakdown of meta-narratives. Now, the French philosopher Jean-Francois Lyotard described postmodernism as an incredulity towards the meta-narrative, or a rejection, or a not really believing in meta-narratives. Meta-narratives are stories that explain all of history, things like Christianity and Marxism and the Enlightenment, pretty much all religions, actually are meta narratives. And in fact, history itself can be considered a meta narrative. So, meta narratives are big stories that explain everything, right? Um, this is the traditional storytelling method. So, we've got the exposition, which is where events begin to happen, an inciting incident, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So, just as an example, I'll pick on Christianity because I'm the most familiar with it. But the exposition is the creation of the world and people. The inciting incident is the fall of humankind. The rising action is all of history that leads up to the crucifixion. Falling action are the world events after that, and the resolution is the new heaven, new earth. Um, so this is how a meta narrative functions, right? So in essence, meta narratives say that history of and the world is a story, and the end of the world justifies the means, whether that's a nirvana, a new heaven, a new earth, a proletariat revolution, what have you. Postmodernism rejects this because if history is a story and the ends justify the means, that means something like the Holocaust has a purpose, right? Postmodernist rejects this. This is why World War II, but specifically the Holocaust, was a major catalyst for postmodernism. Why? Because if history has a purpose, then atrocities like the Holocaust and apartheid were necessary. Postmodernist survey says nope, right? And so postmodernism has a rejection of meta narratives, which leads to works and people that don't belong in or don't believe in authority. That means that essentially no one gets to tell you what to do or what is not true. In literature, this leads to stories that have ambiguity, right? No clear answers. There's intentional confusion, contradictions, unresolved endings. There are no absolutes because truth is based on personal experience because people no longer trust the systems or the meta narratives that used to tell them truth before. There's an emphasis on the individual because of this and defining identity over everything else. And because of that emphasis on the individual, there's more inclusivity. Previously silenced voices, like the voices of women, people of color, immigrants, people in lower classes, they are finally heard. So now we get stories from people whose stories were initially brushed off as unimportant or unwilling of being or unworthy of being told in times before. So let's talk about postmodern poetry specifically. I've got the traits and tools, and I call them chaos tools because they are listed. Um, yeah, so oftentimes you will read works or poems where there's no clear message. The contradictions are there and they are intentional. There's an irony and playfulness, so nothing is sacred. Everything can be picked on from politics to religion to gender to identity. Oftentimes, poems are fragmented and non-linear, so they jump around a lot. And this is because truth is subjective rather than fixed. The techniques, you're going to see intertextuality and pastiche. So you'll see a mixing of styles and why in the art world a really bright picture of a soup can is considered art. There's an element of self-awareness. So sometimes poems will say, this poem is about blah, 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 right? There's language play and rule breaking as well. Punctuation is an afterthought that's sometimes thrown in. Nothing, a lot of times, nothing is capitalized. There's a lot going on. Same thing with minimalism or excess. Sometimes you'll get poems that don't say very much in a lot of words, or poems that say a whole lot in a few words. And then you get absurdity and dark humor, which leads us to today's poems, because they're about the end of the world, and the only thing to do is laugh in the face of it. Both poems today do talk about the postmodern apocalypse. Now, in the traditional post apocalypse, so the end of the world, there's oftentimes divine judgment. There's a clear ending, right? Um, if you remember that picture of Freytag's pyramids, right, there is a resolution at the end, some sort of moral resolution. But in postmodernism is not like that. Remember, they reject the traditional storytelling structure. So the postmodern apocalypse is not fire raining for them from the sky or angels and demons. In postmodernism, the world doesn't end with a bang. It just keeps deteriorating quietly. You can think of things like climate anxiety, economic instability, social fragmentation, diseases that are once in a lifetime, but you feel like happen every other Tuesday, right? So people still go to work, still scroll TikTok, and still say hi to strangers in the postmodern apocalypse. And that contradiction is what we see in today's poems. So let's talk about our first author, Corey Vance. He lives in Missouri, born in 1993, but currently lives in Sacramento, where he does housing work. So he's really aware of the economic equality. He competes in strongman competitions and drinks a whole lot of cappuccinos. I know that from personal experience. I met Corey in college, and he is an incredible poet. But that is why there is a video interview type thing for you to watch in the module. So let's talk about his poem, the premise. So the premise of the poem, it's absurd on purpose, right? So space dragons take over the economy, billionaires lose powers, governments respond poorly. It's just par for the course, but people adapt and survive. So this poem isn't really about dragons. It's about capitalism and wealth equality and systems that feel uncontrollable and the bourgeois oppressing the masses, right? This absurdity is intentional because postmodernism uses ridiculous imagery to expose real problems. So let's take a few or let's analyze a few of these quotes. The first one, the collapse economies in every galaxy. Now this is hyperbole, it's exaggeration, because capitalism feels limitless and unstoppable. This suggests that economic systems are already out of control. The next quote, Amazon trucks delivered a box of flamethrowers in every household. So this is a bit of the blending, a bit of the pastiche and intertextuality. And we've got a blend of corporate convenience with violence, right? So corporates profit from crisis rather than solving it. And they expect the masses to do that, which we see in this next quote. Who's going to do all that slaying anyway? This undercuts the idea of heroism because oftentimes in wars and in conflicts and in any sort of upheaval, it's the lower classes who suffer, right? It's not the people in their mansions with their secure 401ks who suffer. It's the regular people, the little guy, right? And for more information, listen to Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival. Anyway, so, but this quote or this line also suggests that no one is coming to fix this problem because people are tired, right? And so resistance at this point feels pointless. This is the postmodern apocalypse. It's not a battle, it's not a revolution, it's just exhaustion at this point. So the everyday apocalypse in this poem, where the world is ending, but people are still making jokes and doing their best to adapt and settle. The idea is that the apocalypse is survivable, but it's not fixable, which is deeply postmodern. There is no moral lesson, there is no resolution, only a continuation. Now let's talk about our second author, Eve Ewing. She was born in, oh, that's supposed to say 1986. Sorry about that, Eve. I'll fix that in a minute. So unlike Vance, her work is also, or like Vance, her work is also grounded in real social experience. Vance is a sociologist working out of Chicago. But her poem isn't based in sci-fi, but based in real experience. Her poem blends academic thinking with everyday language. And this matters because she brings big ideas to small moments. You'll see some of her beliefs if you read the comics or watch the TV show Ironheart, because she is an author of that. So let's talk about the poem Eschatology. Eschatology is the study of the end of the world. And titling her poem this, when it talks about people acting like ducklings, whatever, this is a very postmodern move because it's a big, serious title for small, everyday content. She's rejecting the religious apocalyptics and grand endings and instead stating that meaning comes from daily interactions. This is a quote about the poem you can read later, but I want to talk about her idea of the idea of Afrofuturism. This runs contrary to the Western worldview that life moves in one direction and the apocalypse is the final ending, so death is a conclusion. The Afrofuturist worldview is that life is an ongoing cycle. Endings are just transformations, and the past and future are connected. So rather than everything is ending, it's everything is changing form, which connects directly to the poem. So let's look at some of the quotes. I love her metaphor of the earth as a flaming trash cake because it's absurd and bleak because the world is broken and chaotic and ridiculous. But there are certain things that keep me alive, keep me afloat. Those small acts of kindness mean survival. So it's not fixing the world so much as helping others endure it. This last quote here, the absolute dregs of possibility is bleak but intentional language. Dregs suggests that the last, very lowest leftover part, that it suggests that society is nearly out of hope. But we have an ironic certainty with the words I'm certain here. Um, this confidence comes from belief in other people. And there's a shift from societal collapse to the bus driver interaction. The poem moves from society at large as a broken abstract system or to a tiny human moment. And this shows that the apocalypse is happening at the macro level, but meaning is found at the micro level in shared human existence. So here in this quote, but I won't feel too sad about it becoming a star, that is the Afrofuturist views, right? It's a flipped of traditional thinking where apocalypse is the end. In Ewing's apocalypse, life continues inside of it, which reframes death and apocalypse as transformation, right? No resolution, no divine meaning, just people being kind anyway. So there is the apocalypse in this poem. Unlike in Space Dragons, this poem isn't loud or chaotic. The world is still ending, but what matters is saying hello and holding doors and small kindnesses. So the apocalypse is happening, but meaning still exists in small human connection. So we have contrasting ideas here. Both poems connect or reject heroic endings, clear meaning, and resolution, but they differ in tone. Vance is very cynical and chaotic, whereas Ewing is gentle and hopeful. The world is ending, but life keeps going. So yeah, these poems suggest that there is no grand resolution company coming. No system will save us. So what's left? Vance says what's left is survive it, and Ewing says that it's to care for each other through it. Postmodern poetry doesn't ask how the world ends. It asks us what we'll do while it's ending.